Europe 4K. Discovering Europe. Pretty much easier said than done. It's a world unto itself, a window on history. Since the old continent shaped the world that we know today on so many levels. The foundations of the Western culture can be easily traced back to countries like Italy, where many battles, evolving territories, and forever changing artistic styles inspired man to leave his mark for eternity. From northern Italy to Sicily, we take a look at these stunning heritages. Paris offers us glamour and the foundations of the modern Western democracy. While Italy offers the essence of life, Paris offers us the romance surrounding it. Paris has always been a favorite destination for travelers. What shaped Paris as the wonder it is today? Is it the artists, the nobilities, an aristocracy, or the politicians? Take a look and find out. Budapest is one fancy roller coaster ride, if you let yourself be entertained. The buzz is strong here, and it seems like the city always has something up its sleeve for your delight. If you leave Paris, come to Budapest. You won't be disappointed. United Italy is a relatively young country. From the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century up until 1871, the Italian peninsula was split among a myriad of independent mini-states. The northern states present Veneto, Lombardy, Tuscany, and Liguria. Became famous for their spectacular prosperity and fierce political rivalry. Today, the northern region is still the most prosperous of Italy, an economic powerhouse. Straddling the river Adige, Verona started its history as a Roman military outpost around 3000 BC. Later, Christianity reshaped the city. Verona's hallmark is a notorious piece of Roman heritage, the arena. Finished in 30 AD, this was the third largest amphitheater in the Roman Empire, with a capacity of 20,000. Ironically, Verona's main claim to fame originates from England, as William Shakespeare chose the city as the setting of the ultimate love story, Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare himself never set foot in Verona, but the eternal rivalry between wealthy Italian families, just like the picturesque Italian landscape, proved an ideal backdrop for the gripping love story, Romeo and Juliet. The famous house on Via Capella received the balcony and the bronze statue of Juliet in 1930, a fact that all tourists willingly forget. The posing on the balcony is, after all, a tribute to the power of love that is so essential to Juliet's character. About 100 kilometers southwest of Verona, along the banks of the meandering River Po, lies the city of Cremona, a town with great artisan traditions and characteristic architecture. The town's cathedral is one of the most significant of its kind in northern Italy. Cremona's population, just shy of 70,000, has plied a variety of trades, but one of them became synonymous with this place, the craft of musical instruments. The best violin and viola maker of all times, Antonio Stradivari, lived and worked here in the 17th and 18th centuries. He made an estimated 1,000 violins, of which 650 survive. If Cremona gave the world some of its best instruments, the city of Padua gave it some of its greatest scholars. Beautiful churches like the Basilica of St. Anthony, as well as one of the oldest universities in the world. The city even built an astronomical observatory in the 18th century, which served the university until 1923. The University of Padua was founded in 1222 by a breakaway group of former Bologna University scholars. Among its alumni, we find Copernicus and Galileo Galilei. The hall next to the Anatomy Theater exhibits busts and coats of arms, old diplomas, portraits, engravings, and extensive frescoes. "60 kilometers east of Venice sits an old rival to Padua and a modern economic center of the Veneto region, Vicenza. This seemingly quiet city is perhaps the single most important repository of worldly Renaissance architecture in northern Italy, full of palaces designed by the great Andrea Palladio. At the western edge of the historic center, Giardino Salvi is a pleasant urban garden offering first-class art. Built on the site of an ancient Roman forum, Piazza del Signore is a quintessential Italian square in the heart of Vicenza. The 16th century Venetian architect Andrea Palladio designed many palaces in Vicenza and several villas around the city, but there were few he actually lived to see completed. One of those is the Palazzo Barbarano, now home of the Palladio Museum. Palladio worked on the palace between 1570 and 1575, rebuilding two existing structures which occupied the site at the time. Halfway between Venice and Milan lies a shared treasure of Veneto, Trentino, and Lombardy regions, Lake Garda, the largest of the North Italian lakes. 51.5 kilometers long and 17 kilometers across at its widest, Lake Garda has become such a popular tourist destination that it now trumps many seaside resorts. Perched on a rock outcrop on the northeastern shore, Castello Scagliero looms sternly over the lake and the town of Malcesina. Malcesina offers staggering views, cozy beaches, and great sailing opportunities. The forbidding castle is called the Rocca Scagliera. Verona's ruling family, the Scaglieri, built it to control the only entrance to the island. 8% of all tourists in Italy now spend some time at Lake Garda, one of Europe's biggest lakes not only in size, but also in fame. Nestling in the lagoons of the River Po and the northwestern Adriatic, Venice is within a few hours' travel from its ancient rival cities. Yet it's arguably a world of its own. Its founders were fishermen who fled the Huns in the 5th century. They built a floating city on 118 small islands and millions of tree trunks. The city of fishermen, craftsmen, and merchants became the first republic in Europe and a heavyweight political power in the Mediterranean and beyond. And St. Mark's Square was center stage to Venetian splendor. It's also the center of the famous Carnival, 3 weeks of balls and indulgence in stylish masks and other disguise. That tradition, too, is almost 1,000 years old. Despite rapid industrialization of its surroundings in the 20th century, Venice has held tight onto its customs on which it prospers. Up to 60,000 tourists visit the floating city every day. Its charm is well worth the higher prices, and you can experience much of it in a couple of days. The Carnival of Venice plays out during the 3 weeks before Lent every year. Napoleon banned the festivities of masked Venetians when he conquered the city. But in 1979, city authorities resurrected the custom with great success. And as you will discover, the costumes come with manners attached. The long-beaked masks were traditionally worn by those infected with cholera or plague to keep a distance between their wearers and the rest of the crowd. The Carnival is one amazing fancy dress party, an expensive one. The buzz mostly concentrates on the spectacular Piazza San Marco. The crowd gathers in front of St. Mark's Cathedral and the magnificent Palazzo Ducale, the Doge's palace. One of the traditional warm-up events in the early days of the Carnival is a procession of boats on the city's main thoroughfare, the Grand Canal. Fool's garments, noblemen in a cascade of lace. This is not a race. There are no winners or losers. It's just a prelude to the true festivities and a chance to test your wacky costumes in daylight. The point is to keep the tradition alive. And remember that even in the Middle Ages, Venetians knew how to throw a party like no other. In western central Italy, between the Apennine Mountains and the Mediterranean Sea, stretches the most emblematic region of the country, Tuscany. The name conjures up endlessly rolling hills, hilltop towns, and great wines. They often call it the pantry of Italy, for it contains some of the best arable land, and its mild climate benefits a variety of crops. But Tuscany offers even more to savor: history, art, and amazing hospitality. Florence, the region's capital city, is perhaps the richest treasure trove of Renaissance art in the world. Its galleries, the Uffizi and Accademia Gallery, exhibit a wealth of fine art by the greatest Italian and foreign masters. And the city shows off an exceptional Renaissance architecture. Florence once played a leading role in European politics and business. And its wealthy elite commissioned works to geniuses like Michelangelo, Donatello, and many others. Crossing the Tuscan countryside, one comes upon smaller towns, sitting in spacious valleys or atop the hills, until one arrives to the next grand city. Pisa, once a naval power itself, boasts a spectacular dome and the famous Leaning Tower. Yet the city itself is also well worth your time. An old arch rival, Lucca, still exudes a medieval atmosphere thanks to its well-preserved city center. Be it culinary, artistic, or historic, the wealth of Tuscany has bewildered travelers since ancient times, and its appeal is in no danger of waning. Established as a modest military base on the river Arno in the 1st century BC, Florence became one of the 5 most populous cities of Europe by the 11th century. Its wealth allowed the city to become the epicenter of a fine art revolution, the Renaissance. The city's chief landmark, the cathedral, with its monumental dome and glossy marble walls, encapsulates Florence's ambition to outshine its rivals. Built between 1296 and 1436, Florence's cathedral was one of the first temples financed by rich donors rather than the Catholic Church. Its facade is ornate with brilliant mosaics and a number of statues. For a romantic river crossing, choose Florence's famous old bridge, Ponte Vecchio. The bridge houses jewelry shops and goldsmiths' flats. An enclosed corridor runs above it all, an exclusive passage added by Florence's ruling family, the Medici, in the 16th century. It leads directly to what is now known as the world's biggest collection of Renaissance art, the Uffizi Gallery. Commissioned in 1560, the U-shaped sculpture-studded palace was meant to house government offices, but eventually it became the home of the immense Medici art collection. From the sumptuous gallery passage, you'll emerge onto Florence's main square, the Piazza della Signoria, which is an al fresco museum itself. And right next to the entrance of the town hall, a copy of Michelangelo's David stands guard. Next to it, you can see a copy of Donatello's Judith and Holofernes. Florence abounds in splendid churches, yet Santa Maria Novella stands out as one of the oldest and most remarkable. The 13th century Romanesque structure got a Renaissance makeover in 1465. Once an important regional power, the city of Pisa also joined the race to build the most spectacular cathedral in Tuscany. Their treasure is the Duomo complex and its famous leaning tower. The reason for the tower's tilt lies below the visitor's feet, an unstable mix of clay and sand. The work on the tower first started in 1173, but 5 years and 3 stories later, the southern half of the structure started to sink, causing the tower to lean. 100 years later, 4 new floors were added, but the tower now not only leaned, it also curved. The bell chamber on top was only completed in 1372. The finished tower measured over 56 meters in height and leaned to a full 3 degrees. In the ensuing centuries, the shift became worse, and it wasn't sorted out until recently. The city closed the tower in 1990. Between 1995 and 1999, engineers siphoned off nearly 70 tons of subsoil from under the northern side and applied 1,000 tons worth of counterweight to buy some time. The operation was a success. The Campanile reopened in 2001 and underwent full restoration by 2011. Perched atop a hill 50 kilometers south of Florence, San Gimignano looms as a medieval Manhattan with 15 brick towers soaring to the sky. Prospering on agriculture and pilgrims, medieval San Gimignano was home to several wealthy families who flaunted their wealth by erecting massive towers of homes. Today, the towers offer magnificent views of the town and central Tuscany. Wherever you travel in Tuscany, you will be tempted by great wine. And that's because Tuscany is strewn with 53 protected wine regions. The many varieties of Chianti, Ruby Red, Brunello di Montalcino, and Sangiovese di Montepulciano need no introduction to a wine connoisseur. And if you are only starting to appreciate wine, Tuscany will be a formative experience. 80% of Tuscany's wine production is red wine, but some white varieties, such as the Vernaccia of San Gimignano, are also well known throughout the world. Tuscan viticulture goes back not centuries, but millennia. The region was a notable wine exporter as early as in the 7th century BC. The olive branch and the golden olive oil are also closely associated with the region. Its olive production has great traditions and follows strict criteria. In fact, the oil plantations of Chianti enjoy the same protection as the region's wines. Rural Tuscany lures foodies and wine lovers from the world over. Its agritourism thrives on culinary tours where visitors can taste the best treats of the region's cuisine and make romantic escapes among the hills. Once a political and commercial center, Tuscany now remains a culinary hotspot and a mecca for fans of the Renaissance. Its cities and its countryside have become the symbols of abundance, a richness that the locals are rightly proud of. As you go on southwards, your way, and proverbially all ways, will lead to Rome. Rising monumentally over the Forum Romanum, in the historic center, the Colosseum is one of the attractions drawing the most visitors to Rome. Emperor Vespasian commissioned this vast amphitheater in 72 AD in a bid to demonstrate his power as well as to soothe political tensions in the city. He knew well the old adage of Roman politics, panem et circenses, bread and circus, guaranteed the emperor's popularity. Week after week, the 50,000 spectators of the Colosseum would get both. The ground floor still has all the 80 arcades through which to enter the Colosseum, but the marble cladding is already gone from large parts of the building. The naked travertine is riddled with a myriad of holes, the sockets for the iron clamps that once held the structure together. The largest amphitheater in ancient times was also one of the first to be constructed on a flat surface and not carved into a hillside. Its main building blocks were brick and tufa. The cladding took enormous amounts of marble and travertine stone. When it was completed, the Colosseum was a breathtaking sight, with its fourth tier reaching up to 57 meters. Once inside, spectators would find themselves in a huge elliptical space. 2 semicircles around the arena spanned 188 meters. The arena floor was made to impress and surprise. Measuring 86 meters in length and 54 meters in width, it sat atop a complex network of corridors and drains. The Colosseum could seat between 50 and 60,000 people at any one time. The seating followed rigid social conventions. The nobility, the senators, and other rich citizens claimed the seats in the lower 2 tiers. The spectators of the lower classes had to climb higher. The top tier supported a ring of sails that covered much of the auditorium and blocked out harsh sunlight. The Colosseum served the Roman Empire for over 400 years, and although gladiator games were abolished in 404 AD, the amphitheater never shed its dubious fame as a stage where death used to be primetime entertainment. Ironically, it's now a Christian monument. The political and commercial center of the empire was the Forum Romanum, a 2-hectare quarter between the hills of Capitol, Palatine, Viminal, and Coronel. This was the beating heart of ancient Rome, a scene bustling with officials, merchants, soldiers, and commoners. The spine of this busy city center was Via Sacra, and to this day, it is the central road you take to explore the Forum. Descending from the Capitol Hill, the visitor crosses a triumphal arc of Septimus Severus. This early 3rd century arc was built by his sons, Caracalla and Geta. The reliefs chronicle Severus's triumphs in the wars he waged in the Middle East against the Assyrians and the Parthians. To the right of the arc, the 8 columns of the Temple of Saturn remain the earliest monuments of the Forum. On the right side of Via Sacra, the steps and rows of columns are the only bits left of Basilica Julia, an ancient tribunal from the 2nd century BC, later expanded by Julius Caesar. With the collapse of the empire, a long period of degradation started here. The Forum Romanum even served as a cow pasture in the 18th century, and modern-day archaeologists had to unearth most of these ruins from under 10 meters of rubble and sand. Remarkably, the Forum still evokes some of the splendor of its heyday. Perched right above the Forum Romanum, Piazza del Campidoglio, or Capitol Hill, is an arresting piece of Renaissance architecture. Michelangelo himself redesigned this square to give it its fine proportions. It's embraced by 3 palaces, Rome's Town Hall and the Capitoline Museums on either side. At the center stands the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of the 2nd century AD. Guarded by timeless demigod figures of Castor and Pollux, the Capitol Hill is the ultimate achievement of non-religious Renaissance architecture. Of the dozen bridges spanning the River Tiber, Ponte San Angelo is the most symbolic, along with the fortress behind it, Castello Sant'Angelo. They perfectly encapsulate Europe's transition from the late Roman culture into pious Catholicism. Built originally by Emperor Hadrian in the 1st century AD, both the bridge and the castle came to serve the church. The castle protected the Pope from foreign invasion, and the marble bridge became the only river crossing to the Vatican State. From the fortress, it only takes a short walk to reach the center of Christianity, St. Peter's Square and St. Peter's Cathedral. The complex, as we see it today, was built around the 16th and 17th centuries, on the site of a much older construct erected to enshrine St. Peter's tomb in the 4th century. Designed and executed by masters such as Bramante, Bernini, Raphael, Sangallo, Maderno, and Michelangelo, St. Peter's Square and its cathedral showcase Renaissance and Baroque art at their best. The genuine Egyptian obelisk was placed here at the behest of Pope Sixtus V. In the moment of its consecration, St. Peter's Square became a wonder for the world to behold. Today, the annual number of visitors reaches 5 million. Nestled in the dense fabric of Rome's historic city center, Piazza Navona has a much worldlier vibe, though most of it was conceived and commissioned by Pope Innocent X. The highlight of Piazza Navona is the Egyptian obelisk mounted on the largest of the square's three fountains. The Fountain of the Four Rivers, which represents the Ganges, the Nile, the Plate, and the Danube. The obelisk stands right in front of the San Agnese in Agone Church. Sitting atop the ruins of an ancient Roman amphitheater, Piazza Navona was reborn during the reconstruction in the 17th century. It became Rome's favorite market and meeting point. At the tip of the Italian boot sits Sicily, the largest and most populated island of the Mediterranean. Sicily sits in the very heart of the Mediterranean, close to the shores of the desiccated North Africa and at the meeting point of the Ionian and Tyrrhenian Seas. Its location has set its course in history and determines the lifestyle of its people. For many travelers, the point of entrance is Messina, the port city of the Strait of Messina on the northeastern tip of the island. The city of Catania has known more than any other community the destructive force of the volcano. In 1693, a huge earthquake destroyed most of Catania, yet the restoration effort turned out to be a great success. Its Baroque cathedral, St. Agatha Cathedral, as well as the city's main square, are testament to this. The sturdiest building in town, the medieval fort, Castello Orsino, did survive the great earthquake. As a port, Catania has had a long-standing connection with the sea. Commercial fishing is still a very important business here. No wonder the city is home to one of the biggest and oldest fish markets in Sicily, La Pescheria. If you are after the freshest swordfish and tuna in Italy, this is the place to be. But you'd better arrive early. The best goods sell fast. Catania has passed many tests of resilience throughout its history. The Etna has destroyed it 7 times, but the city has always reemerged. Seen from a ship, Syracuse's most salient feature is its heavily fortified island, Orteggia, and its fortified tip, Castello Maniace. The city's beaches and seaside promenades also seem inviting, but the chief attraction of this age-old town awaits on top of the hill. The amphitheater, hewn into the limestone by the ancient Greek in the 5th century, was, upon completion, the largest of its kind in the world, seating 15,000 and staging shows of Greek tragedies. A quarry mine gapes next to the theater. The shape and great acoustics earned this cavern the nickname the Ear of Dionysius. Neapolis also obtained a giant altar commissioned by King Hiaran II in the 3rd century BC. During the festivities, it was not uncommon to sacrifice up to 500 live animals on this altar. Close by, you will find the ruins of a Roman amphitheater which was plundered for stone by later conquerors, mostly the Spanish. What is now Piazza Domo in modern Syracuse was the center city life in the ancient Greek metropolis. Remarkably, the main Greek temple still stands as an integral part of the Baroque Cathedral of Syracuse. The current Baroque facade was designed by Andrea Palma in the mid-1700s. The town got its overwhelming Baroque character after the great earthquake destroyed much of the old town in 1693. The other major city founded by Greek colonizers was Taormina. Looking down at the Bay of Naxos, the city evolved into a popular commercial and cultural hotspot. The city's Greek amphitheater, though smaller than that of Syracuse, is one of the best preserved in the world, and it offers sweeping views of Mount Etna and the city below. Extended by the Romans to a total capacity of 5,000, this spacious theater is still in working condition, despite the heavy damage it suffered during World War II. Once they arrive in the city center, most travelers gravitate toward Piazza Nove Aprile to enjoy its architecture, its cafes, and above all, the fantastic view. Otherwise, the inner city follows the classic Mediterranean pattern of narrow, shady streets and cozy piazzas. The public garden of Villa Comunale of Taormina is perhaps the most famous of its kind south of Rome. 3 hectares of exotic and continental vegetation punctuated by pagodas and monuments. It's easy to see why Johann Wolfgang Goethe hailed this city a patch of paradise. Since the early 1800s, a number of world-famous artists, such as Gustav Klimt, Guy de Maupassant, Oscar Wilde, and Ingmar Bergman have visited Taormina for inspiration. Not far from Piazza Nova Aprile, you will find the city's fortress-like cathedral. From its gardens and terraces, Taormina offers epic scenery with the Ionian Sea. On the other side, Europe's highest volcano, Mount Etna. A giant outlet for Earth's inner furnace, this mountain has always been a metaphor for the 2 faces of nature of fertility and destruction. Its fine volcanic ash has been a crucial source of minerals on which Sicilian agriculture and viticulture depend. At the same time, tectonic forces have wreaked havoc on Sicily's eastern coast many times, erasing whole cities from existence. Today, this smoldering beast is constantly being watched, monitored, as well as visited by curious travelers who can reach altitudes of over 3,000 meters. The Etna remains the largest active volcano in Europe. It has produced several smaller flank and summit eruptions in the past decade. The cooling lava cakes into knobby chunks of porous rock, which eventually get eroded and washed into the topsoil of eastern Sicily. On the western shores of the island, the Bay of Stagnone has produced salt for 2,700 years. These windmills once pumped seawater from the sluice gates into the ponds. Salt has always been at the core of Marsala's prosperity. The city saw great architects and great invasions: Romans, Byzantines, Normans, and Aragonians, but the most important landing was that of Giuseppe Garibaldi and his 1,000 volunteers on the 11th of May, 1860. Since the Middle Ages, Palermo has been the dominant city of Sicily, and it's the capital of the Sicily region today. First a seat of the city's Arabic rulers, Palermo became the capital of the Normans in the 12th century. They built a spectacular cathedral and integrated the city's Arabic heritage into their own cityscape. The city's Benedictine cloister showcases the crossover of those cultures. After they had taken over the city and the island, the Normans took inspiration from the arches and colonnades of their Muslim predecessors. South of the Etna, the city of Noto is a must-see gem of Sicilian Baroque, which reached its full power during the reconstructions following the Great Earthquake of 1693. The city offers a profusion of that flamboyant Baroque. What's more, its splendid buildings were arranged in a rigorous, transparent grid layout. The 18th century city planners built a completely new town, and they largely relied on the genius of Francesco Sortino and Rosario Gagliardi. The northern Sicilian town of Cefalu has two claims to fame: the great rock above it and the medieval Norman cathedral. The monstrous rock, La Rocca, towers over the town and defines its skyline. Cefalu's city center practically ends at the sea, and the town's lidos teem with tourists for the best part of the year. The Norman Cathedral is a true masterpiece, built during the golden age of Norman Romanesque. Cefalu has all the best traits of Italy: grand historic buildings wedged between the mountains and the sea, and a people that live at ease and in harmony with nature. Leaving Italy, we continue our European tour in France. Paris has always been a favorite destination for travelers, and there are many reasons for it. Just like in Italy, many blood-ridden battles shaped the modern-day cultural heritage of Western Europe. Paris witnessed all these fights of embourbement in the 18th century, which inspired so many artists and city planners. While Italy offers the essence of life, Paris offers us the romance surrounding it. Paris has been a prominent settlement for more than 2 millennia, and since the 6th century, the capital of France. Its location on the bank of the River Seine, with all of its economical increments, had turned Paris into one of the principal cities of France by the 10th century. Cathedrals, abbeys, and royal palaces emerged. Paris has witnessed both harmonious and revolutionary times, but has never failed to progress and recover throughout its history. It has developed not only by welcoming contemporary and unique initiatives, but by respecting and preserving the values of the past. Over the centuries, Paris has been the seedbed of several philosophical, cultural, and political achievements. Today, it is among the world's leading economic and cultural centers. Being a metropolitan city, Its major influences in politics, business, education, architecture, and entertainment are globally present. In the heart of the country, countless architectural treasures await for us to explore the spirit of the city. Notre Dame is the cathedral that the past left behind from the medieval ages. Step to the edge of the Parvis to see its gigantic mass, envisioning the infinity of the universe. The wonderful rose window, claimed to be one of the biggest glass windows in the world, was produced in the 13th century. The Virgin and Child in the middle of the facade marks that the cathedral is dedicated to Mary. Bishop Maurice de Sully initiated the construction in 1163, which went on for over 180 years from the moment the first stone was laid. Through the centuries, several architects left their signatures on the facade, evident in the differing styles at different heights of the west front and towers. All sculptural ornaments date back to the 12th and 13th centuries. However, the original conception has been altered by reconstructions showcasing finest examples of Gothic art. Entering the cathedral, the faith of the sculptures has conjured a majestic atmosphere, heralded by the ancient gables of the portals. However, the cathedral has always served as a bridge between the secular and the sacred world. It has been the gateway which led the thoughts of the faithful from everyday reality through to the transcendent world. Notre Dame has its own story to tell, of both glorious and tragic moments. For centuries, it has witnessed the greatest events in French history: 80 kings, 2 emperors, 5 republics, and 2 world wars. The edges of the balustrades, the shadows of pillars and pinnacles are the lurking places of otherworldly beasts. They have been shut out from the sacred inner spaces of the cathedral. These gargoyles and chimeras were designed and sculpted by Victor Payanet during restoration works from 1843 to 1864. Violette Leduc, the restorer, was highly influenced by Victor Hugo, who shone the light of the medieval cathedral through his romantic novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The touch of the restorer is apparent everywhere. Violette Leduc believed that restoration generated something new that may not have existed before. Evolution is necessary, while former values must be kept. That creates harmony and the unity of design. This monument of French history itself was originally a medieval defense fortress that was transformed into a royal palace during the Renaissance. Finally, the Louvre became the guardian of the past's treasures, from ancient times to contemporary themes. Before entering the Louvre, take a moment to pass through the Arc de Triomphe de Carrousel. The chariots and horses atop Napoleon I's arch are replicas of the original statues from Venice. The monument is richly decorated with bas-reliefs depicting the major events of the military campaign. The Corinthian pillars are topped with statues of soldiers from Napoleon's army. Only a few steps away from the riches of the museum, the marvelous glass pyramid calls our attention. The American architect Liu Mingpei's subterranean entrance hall resembles the Notre landscape designer's work from the 17th century with its strict geometric patterns. 675 diamond-shaped and 118 triangular panes were designed to reach the highest transparency and light of the entrance. The modern glass structure has a solid contrast with the Pierre Lescot's Renaissance facade of the Louvre. Somehow, it keeps a balance between the overwhelming power of the historical reliefs and statues. The whole complex calls for a walk around the square to let us marvel at the sumptuous details of the Louvre facade, standing as an example of the successful combination of the historic and new, a combination which creates that mysterious atmosphere that sways around Paris. While also a piece of art in itself, the Louvre is also home to many world-famous paintings and sculptures. The charm of Versailles is closely associated with the Sun King, Louis XIV. The milieu of the legend around Versailles has been exaggerated by the tragic ingredients of its history. Louis XIV rose in glory, but passed away in darkness of clouds after a prolonged gloomy sunset. The Grandeur Palace forces the surrounding nature into geometrical shapes. In the composition of this Baroque garden, we must realize the manifestation of absolutism. Trees and shrubs are still clipped accordingly to the tastes of the 17th century. These outdoor rooms were decorated by the designer André de Notre with the help of artists and architects. The garden, with its expansive frame of reference, gradually fades into the scenery, depicting the force keeping everything under its authority. Louis's reign was the summit of the absolute monarchy, which had been evolving since the mid-15th century. When his chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin, died and Louis took control over the country, he inherited incomparable unity and power. He considered himself an absolute monarch and was certain that God endowed kings with their power to be able to rule personally. However, this is an ideology of the past. Versailles guards the memory of absolutism as a museum. Today, the palace and gardens are under the shielding of UNESCO World Heritage. Certainly there is a fascinating milieu that breezes through the airs of the palace, attracting some 3 million visitors a year. People are mesmerized by the unique blend of natural and man-made beauty in the gardens. During the first stages of his reign, Louis reckoned on the work of his incorruptible honest finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who supported the king's rise to magnificence. He understood the need for a sound financial system was crucial regarding both Versailles and the king's overbearing foreign policies. Although Colbert implemented his mercantilist ideas and France became self-sufficient, the luxurious building projects and the constant warfare of the last 3 decades of Louis's reign led France to a state of bankruptcy. By the final years of Louis's life, France had fallen into a perilous state. Reform or revolution was needed. Louis XVI failed in the storm, and his failure was the breakout of the French Revolution of 1789. Nothing lasts forever. By recognizing the value of the past, humans are able to focus on maintaining what is precious and respecting the glory of this bygone era. de Triomphe means much more to France than a mere memorial to Napoleon's military and the victories of the French Revolution, Consulate, and Empire. As the inauguration of the Arc was long after Napoleon's fall, and even the dissolution of the Bourbons, it commemorates the solidifying importance of French democracy. It generates its power by being able to unify the divergent aspects of French history through the symbolic language of the classical architectural design. The Iron Lady of Paris. The 1,000-foot iron structure adorned with iron lace reveals Gustave Eiffel's genius. Eiffel, along with his team, had dreamt and founded this ethereal slender tower for the 1889 World's Fair. Fulfilling the desire of France to recapture its past glory, the tower eventually changed the skyline of Paris and evolved into an iconic symbol of the city. With marvelous exactitude and pace, the 300 meters high tower was finished in 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days. The ostensibly plain structure conceals an extremely complicated mechanism that renders to serve its visitors. Impressive technological solutions resulted to comprise its robust iron body by 18,000 metallic parts, each of them designed separately to give exactly the shape needed and joined together by 2.5 million rivets. Just as its strength is the beauty of the old lady, the tower also suggests Eiffel's craving for the harmony of lines. Each movement towards the top provides an impressive view of Paris through the iron framework. Once Eiffel said, "The first principle of architectural beauty is that the essential lines of construction be determined by a perfect appropriateness to its use." That is the old lady. The Champs-Élysées is the most famous avenue in the world. Since the 19th century, the elegant avenue has been filled with a series of exclusive cafes, restaurants, shops, and cinemas. The former meeting place for intellectuals, the elegant cafes yielded their place to the hub. Stores of world brands completely changing the atmosphere of the historical street into an extremely vivid touristic place. Montmartre Hill, according to history, is associated with the martyr-turned patron saint, Saint Denis, a 3rd century bishop in Paris. He was condemned to death. After his head was chopped off on this hill, he bent down to pick it up and carried it 6 kilometers to where he wanted to be buried. Then he fell down dead, exactly where the present abbey of Saint Denis is located. This is the legend of Montmartre. Spending some time in the Montmartre area, we find ourselves having traveled back in time to the most stunning epoch of Parisian history. An era full of joy, a burst of creativity, bohemianism, and lack of concern with economic development. This period, called the Belle Epoque, stretched from the end of the 19th century to the beginning of World War I in 1914. It marked a solid transition from old to modern times. Paris was the true epicenter of bustle. Artists like Pissarro and Junquin lived in Montmartre. Then Renoir, Matisse, Picasso followed them, to name just a few. Shortly, it became known as the original artists' enclave in the city. Only a few developments have been implemented, and the historic area has kept much of its village-like charm, embodying the mystique of Paris. Today, the heart of Montmartre is the Place des Tertres, some 200 meters from the Sacré-Cœur. Hundreds of painters and portrait artists and caricaturists are officially working here. Again, Paris shows its true face by maintaining a slice of the past. Enjoy this short scenario. Such as all of the Parisian historical buildings, Les Invalides is a monument which salutes the past by maintaining but reconsidering it to fit to the expectations of modern times. Tourists are mainly attracted to the dome and its famous tomb of the Emperor Napoleon. The building today houses one of the world's biggest military art and history museums, with about 500,000 military objects, including the numerous cannons displayed in the gardens and courtyards. Throughout its history, it has been dedicated to the military and still functions as a hospital and retirement home for war veterans, maintaining many of its original purposes. Les Invalides was completed by the order of Louis XIV in 1676, who was well known by his grandeur building projects and also his engagement in military action. The reason behind establishing a hospital for wounded soldiers and veterans was that many of the veterans were only capable of begging, which caused social turmoil. Such a home like the Invalides, which was taking care of the disabled soldiers, pleased both the military and the civil population of Paris. This ingenious gesture enabled Louis to continue his warfare. Between 1789 and 1802, France was racked by a revolution which radically changed the government, administration, military, and culture of the nation, as well as plunging Europe into a series of wars. France went from a largely feudal state under an absolutist monarch through the French Revolution to a republic which executed the king, and then to an empire under Napoleon Bonaparte. The Dôme des Invalides, which holds Napoleon's tomb, is the hallmark of the Les Invalides. Numerous bas-reliefs depict the main achievements of his reign, from the pacification of the nation to administrative centralization. His legacies are the State Council, Civil Code, Concordat, the Imperial University, and the Legion of Honor. Napoleon's name today remains synonymous with military influence and leadership. His tomb was sculpted from blocks of red quartzite and stands at the center of the dome, reflecting the impression that it contains one of the greatest men on earth. The Moulin Rouge is another determining scene of Paris. The fame and popularity of the Parisian nights date back to the Belle Époque. As of today, the shows, cabarets, revues are still in business and claim a great stake in the image of Paris. A city with 1,000 faces, Paris is fascinating, thrilling, elegant, historic, sophisticated, bustling, stylish, memorable, cultural, artistic, nationalist, charming, spectacular, modern, sensual, Renoir, gorgeous, splendid, magnificent, opulent, teeming, successful, bursting, lavish, extravagant, futuristic, brilliant, gleaming, sparkling, simply unforgettable. Welcome to Budapest, one of the most sought-after hotspots of Central Europe. The city itself resembles Paris in many ways. There are so many visible similarities. It's not just the 19th century architecture. It's not just the many bridges crossing the river. But once you set out to discover the smaller details of the city, a more spontaneous, laid-back Eastern European vibe will carry you throughout your journey. From a certain perspective, Budapest appears larger than life, and it's a treasure trove for urban explorers. Budapest's #1 landmark is still the Parliament building, the third largest of its kind in the world. The Parliament is a prime example of tasteful neo-Gothic architecture and an epic monument to Hungary's rich, if torrential, history. Even in scorching summer heat, Budapest offers a refreshing adventure for the young, the old, and the curious. Budapest sits at the heart of mainland Europe. A population of 2.5 million people, it's the biggest city along the Danube River. The modern capital was born from the merger of 3 historic towns, Buda, Óbuda, and Pest, in 1873. Yet the historic roots of these settlements go back to Roman times. The first Roman forts and towns were built on the hilly west bank of the Danube, in Óbuda. The Romans then colonized the other shore in an ongoing struggle to defend the eastern frontier of their empire. From the 13th century, Buda served as the permanent seat of the Hungarian kings for several centuries. Yet the bulk of what you see and relish in this city is the product of Budapest's modern heyday, the 19th century. Most of its bridges, palaces, and quays were built by wealthy merchants and an enlightened aristocracy. For everything medieval and fall medieval, explore Buda's Castle Hill district and brave the crowd for the best city views. Scale one of the 7 turrets of the Fisherman's Bastion, a monument built in the late 19th century on top of the old castle walls. The bastion that used to stand on this site was protected and manned by the Fishermen's Guild, hence its name. It now consists of 7 turrets, one for each of the 7 Hungarian tribes that settled in the Carpathian Basin in the late 9th century. The view from here is simply stunning, and the entrance is free, day or night. The adjoining Trinity Square is ruled by the equestrian statue of St. Stephen, Hungary's first Catholic king, and the soaring tower of the Matthias Church. The splendid Gothic church was finished in 1255 and got its magnificent tower during King Matthias's 15th century reign. However, the original structure was severely damaged during various wars and a 145-year-long Turkish occupation. Thanks to thorough and painstaking renovation in the late 19th century, you can now revel in a structure which is similar to the original. From Trinity Square, head towards the castle of Buda to explore the Baroque hilltop town that is the Castle District. Explore its shady, cobblestone streets, amble along its thick, walled fortification, and enjoy the breathtaking panorama of the sprawling city below. And don't miss the changing of the guard in front of the Sándor Palace. The Castle District offers a proper flavor of the royal past and fantastic views of modern Budapest and its lifeblood, the Danube. One couldn't imagine Budapest without the Danube. Europe's second largest river has brought immense prosperity to the city for centuries. And after the remarkable engineering feat of taming it, its gentle curves are now locked firmly in the memory of its people and its visitors. 9 bridges span this impressive river in the city center, and a whole fleet of passenger boats brave the strong currents. You can hop on and off at a good dozen spots along the banks. The river remains an international thoroughfare and the main access point to the city for a number of visitors. The quays of Pest show off with their expensive restaurants and swanky hotels, while the Buda side offers great views of the Parliament, affordable bars, and welcome shade during the hot summer months. The Chain Bridge is the first and most famous of all Danube bridges. Built by Hungary's most enlightened aristocrat, Count Széchenyi, in the 1840s, the 380-meter-long chain bridge became synonymous with reform, modern times, and national pride. Széchenyi commissioned the design to William Turney Clark. One of the most beautiful suspension bridges in the world, the Chain Bridge is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The bridge features 2 guardian lions at either end. The suspicion that the lions have no tongues kept the city abuzz for a number of years, but it turned out to be an urban legend. Though normally busy with traffic, the Chain Bridge sees a handful of car-free days every year when pedestrians take over this most iconic river crossing. The bridge hangs from 48-meter-tall ornate pillars and steel chains rather than cables. When crossing the chain bridge, you are on the move between two strategic points. The zero milestone marks the starting point of the main roads that run from Budapest to various parts of the country. On the Pest side of the chain bridge stands the statue of Count Széchenyi, the greatest of the Hungarians. And behind it, another one of his paramount achievements, the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. In 1827, Count Széchenyi offered his total annual revenue to establish the academy, which opened in 1830. The academy runs 15 research institutions in 11 different subjects. But many take the other direction after arriving on the Pest side and walk along the shady Danube Corso. Others choose to stay in one of Budapest's high-end hotels in the first place. Most of them are owned by one of the big international hotel chains. The capital's beautiful hotel, the Grisham Palace, is no exception. Built by Grisham Life Assurance Company between 1904 and 1907, the palace is the consummation of the Art Nouveau movement in Budapest. The Grisham Palace now functions as a 179-room luxury hotel. About 200 meters south of the Grisham Palace, another fine example of Hungarian Art Nouveau, the Vigadó Concert Hall, dominates the quay. Designed in the mid-19th century by Frigyes Feisel, the palace blends early Art Nouveau features with classicism. The fountain and statue in front of the palace were designed by Király Sanyai in 1896. The recently renovated facade is clad in reliefs and statues of Hungarian kings and symbols, such as Hungary's coat of arms, along with the sacred crown. The Vigadó is one of Hungary's most significant concert halls. Its Grand Hall seats up to 700, and its Chamber Hall has a capacity of 220. The building was the first sign of the political thaw between the two countries, which ultimately led to a new golden era in industry and culture in the late 19th century. The Danube Corso, or promenade, which passes in front of the Vigadó, stretches between the Chain Bridge and the Elizabeth Bridge. The cafes and expensive restaurants of the embankment get busy once the heat has cooled off. Hop on tram number 2 here for a ride all the way north or south on the Danube's left bank. Or take any street eastward and you will end up in Budapest's downtown shopping district. Váci Street is always abuzz with shopping tourists and packed with restaurants and souvenir shops. The former Stock Exchange Palace, which housed the Hungarian stock market between 1992 and 2007, is another UNESCO World Heritage Site. This sumptuous marble building is one of the last monumental city palaces built in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The eclectic-style building was finished in 1915. At its northern end, Váci Street meets Vörösmarty Square, a spacious and elegant public square ringed with restaurants and fashion retailers. It's also a favorite spot for pop-up markets and cafes and home to the Christmas Arts and Crafts Market in the final weeks of the year. Opening right onto Vörösmarty Square, the Zserbo Palace is a foodie's mecca. Under the same roof, you will find the Zserbo, one of Budapest's oldest and best pastry cafes, and Onyx, one of the city's Michelin star restaurants. Continue east and you can't miss St. Stephen's Square, with the largest church in the country, St. Stephen's Basilica. The neoclassical cathedral was erected in the second half of the 19th century based on the plans of Józef Hild and Miklos Ibel. It can seat up to 8,500 people, and its 96-meter-high cupola offers fantastic city views. Both the Parliament building and the Basilica rise to the exact same height, 96 meters, as a symbol of parity between worldly and religious powers. The Basilica's name comes from the invaluable relic we find inside, the mummified right hand of St. Stephen, the first and most revered of the Hungarian kings. The facade carries a well-known quote from the Bible, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Directly above, Leo Fessler's sculptures depict Hungarian saints and Austria's patron saint, Leopold, as they worship the Virgin Mary and the infant Jesus. The cupola of the Basilica has sweeping views of the city. Turn towards the Danube for great sunset photos. Or walk around and take a look at the extravagant housing that was in vogue in 19th century Budapest. Look closely to spot some of the most exciting Art Nouveau buildings of the capital. You can't really see the end of the city. That's because Budapest is a sprawling agglomeration of 2.5 million inhabitants. Many people still live in the crowded, though greatly improved tower blocks built in the communist era at the edge of the city. Following decades of prosperity and progress, the 20th century marks the most dramatic chapter of Budapest's history. Between the two world wars, the capital grappled with poverty and food rationing, while the Second World War left the city in ruins. Its magnificent bridges had been blasted into the Danube. 10 years later, the Russian tanks ravaged the city again to suppress the country's short but brave revolution. From the 1960s onwards, the city found lasting peace again. Metro lines 2 and 3 were built in those decades, but that was not the only change that happened underground. During the 80s, Budapest was home to the most vibrant democratic movements in the Soviet bloc, paving the way to democracy. The city also built continental Europe's first underground railway between 1894 and 1896. Take the metro and it will take you to the biggest square of Budapest. Heroes Square is a direct link between Hungary's 1,000-year-long history and its present. At first sight, it's a purely historic monument, with the tomb of the unknown soldier and the statues of the 7 Magyar chieftains who led Hungarians in the Carpathian Basin in 896. The nomadic Hungarians conquered the basin and settled in 7 tribes across the country. For 300 years, the kings of the Hungarian kingdom could all trace their lineage back to Arpad, the greatest of all the 7 chiefs. At the center of the square soars a 36-meter marble column topped by the Archangel Gabriel. In his right hand, he holds up the sacred crown of the Hungarian kingdom, and in his left hand shimmers the double-barred Apostolic Cross. 2 colonnades enclose the central composition. 14 bronze statues depict towering figures of Hungary's history, kings and noblemen who reigned in prosperity or fought decisive wars to defend the nation. Below each statue, you will find a relief depicting a historic moment and the age in which it unfolded. The composition on Heroes Square was built as a monumental statement to the nation's history. Heroes Square saw mass protests and the 1989 reburial of Imre Nagy, who presided over Hungary's 1956 revolution against the Soviet occupation. The Republic of Hungary was declared in 1989 in the gorgeous building that remains the hallmark of the city, the House of Parliament. A relative latecomer in Hungary's landscape, the Parliament holds a historical significance that's hard to overstate. It saw progress and prosperity, endured world wars and revolutions, and became the Parliament of a young democracy in 1989. Extending in front of the Parliament, Lajos Kossuth Square has recently seen a complete makeover. Even the 6-meter-tall statue of the nation's modern heroes, Lajos Kossuth and 8 members of the 1848 Revolutionary Cabinet, was reconstructed in 2015. Ornate, symmetrical, flamboyant, the Parliament is one of those buildings where Neo-Gothic blends seamlessly with Neo-Renaissance. Along with the statues of kings and modern statesmen, the Parliament emerges as a monumental statement of history and statehood. 691 rooms, a grand hall, and 2 identical assembly chambers, 29 gates, 10 courtyards. The largest building in the country was built as a symbol of Hungary's sovereignty between 1885 and 1904. Today it houses not only the Hungarian Parliament, but also the sacred crown of St. Stephen, Hungary's first Catholic king. Visitors enter the building from the newly re-landscaped Kossuth Square, the beating heart of Hungarian politics through the last century. You can witness the changing of the guard on the hour between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and the ceremonial raising of the Hungarian flag at 8:30 in the morning. The Parliament and its surroundings draw millions of visitors each year. If you know its blood-stained history, you can't help feeling elevated by the square's ceremonies. It's only been 25 years since the country became a democracy, following the sacrifice of thousands of revolutionaries, politicians, and commoners who became the martyrs of Hungary's torrential history. It's their ideas and dreams that have been fulfilled in this building, and finally, in a modern, democratic society. Hungary's 20th century history is one of wars, foreign occupations, authoritarianism, and terror. Intimidation, torture, and forced convictions were common practice in the notorious building at 60 Andrassy Avenue. First, it served as the infamous urban prison of the fascist regime during the Second World War, only to be taken over by the secret police of the communist regime after 1946. Since 2002, the ill-famed building houses the House of Terror Museum, which exhibits the tools of torture and tells the stories of the late victims in bizarre detail. Thousands of people are said to have been killed or crippled here by brutal regimes. To this day, the building's windows remain eerily covered, and modern architecture has found a way to mark the building for what it truly was for 60 years, the House of Terror. Summer or late summer are possibly the best times to visit Budapest. The long, sunny, and mostly dry days are ideal for long city tours. Towards dusk, a sense of anticipation seizes the city center. The 65-meter-high Budapest Eye is hardly original, but it's still a popular feature of Budapest's most popular public square, Elizabeth Square. The square where the new National Theatre was originally planned attracts thousands of people every summer evening. Underneath the artificial pond sits a hip bar and a state-of-art concert hall. Connecting Király Street and Dob Street in the heart of Budapest's former Jewish quarter, the Gosdú courtyard is just a stone's throw away from Elizabeth Square. This series of beautifully restored courtyards is full of bars and restaurants. It's hard to get bored with it. Also a hotspot for Budapest's tightly knit salsa community. DOCU Courtyard offers an incredible variety of food, drink, and grassroots entertainment. You can also get into the early evening buzz in one of Pest's rooftop bars. At 39 Andrassy Avenue, the 360 Bar is one of the most stylish hangouts in the center, where sweeping city views make a stunning backdrop for exotic cocktails and other beverages. Budapest is a busy city, but even in its hustle and bustle, there is something laid back and nonchalant. And the closer you get to nightfall, the better the vibe becomes. Vörösmarty Square and the streets around the Basilica are known for a more subdued, more casual nightlife. These streets are not so crowded at night, so they are ideal if you are looking for a relaxing stroll or a drink at a traditional bar. As the night falls over Budapest, the lights come on and the city starts to show off its true glamour. Dwarfed by the majestic Parliament building, small ships with their lights glinting pass under the Danube's bridges. Even the fountain on Margaret Island looks more ceremonial with its lights on. Off the quays and the dizzying skylines, the pulse of the city quickens. If you are young or still youthful, the places to be are the 5th, 6th, and 7th districts. In summer, good weather holds up even after dark, and Pest becomes one big piazza. The streets are abuzz and the bars are packed around Erzsébet Square, and Király Street, which is a major artery of downtown nightlife. Erzsébet Square hosts a massive urban fiesta every night. No matter what your dress code or your background, you will make friends here. Music and laughter are in the air. By 11 p.m., bars in the DOCU Courtyard go from busy to jam-packed, a slightly more formal setting, but still great to mix with locals and drink some great wine. Going down Kaczynski Street, you are in the world of ruined pubs. Buzzing in 200-year-old courtyards, which are often gaps left by demolished houses, or livening up decrepit, once-forgotten buildings, ruined pubs are all but unique to Budapest. The movement to reclaim the old, often ruinous houses of the Jewish district started with a few pioneers, but now they are the norm here, and the symbol of turning a difficult heritage into a thriving business. Apart from the Fisherman's Bastion, the citadel of Budapest rewards you with the most breathtaking view of the city and its surroundings. The fortress, perched on a hill, was built by the Habsburgs after the War of Independence in the mid-19th century in order to prevent future revolutions. The Austrian garrison troops could enjoy this panorama day after day. The Statue of Liberty was dedicated to Hungary's liberation from the Nazi occupation in 1945. The statue is now an emblem of Budapest, despite the fact that the Soviet liberators ended up occupying Hungary, outstaying a welcome they never had by 50 years. After the regime change, the statue complex underwent some modifications which stripped it of all Soviet symbols. The Statue of Liberty has a new, stronger, and more positive meaning today. It embodies the nation's confidence in lasting prosperity and democracy, the luxuries this country had so little of throughout the past century.